So our next speaker will be Rodrigo Silva Ferreira. Rodrigo is a QA engineer at Posit, where he contributes to the quality and usability of open source tools that empower data scientists in R and Python. He focuses on both manual and automated testing strategies to ensure reliability, performance, and an excellent user experience. All right, and without further ado, the floor is yours, Rodrigo.
Yeah, can, okay, cool. So I'll get started. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Today I'll be presenting about to notebook or not to notebook, multilingual workflows for exploratory data analysis. It's my first time in Canada, by the way, and I'm really enjoying the experience so far. So, so thank you everyone from the organization, all the sponsors for organizing this amazing event. And without further ado, I will start by introducing myself a little bit. So I'm originally from Brazil, from a city called Salvador. That's a picture of my city. I'm based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I work as a QA engineer at Posit. And my background is in chemistry, but in the past few years, I've been getting more into statistics, data, especially in the context of data analysis for issues of societal importance. That's what I'm really interested in, because I believe that data and statistics can be really helpful in helping understand and improving the world. And that's my personal blog, in case anyone's interested. And yeah, so when I'm talking about something that I'm new to, I really like to stand on the shoulders of giants. That's what people refer to that in academia. And I see a lot of this conference as a conversation between different talks that happen in different locations. And then after the conference, they all become available on YouTube. And that's what I really find exciting, to watch them later and to see how they are interconnected and how the speakers have established that those conferences as a medium for dialogue and for debates and for conversations. And so with that in mind, one of my favorite keynote talks that I attended recently was at PyData Boston, which was given by one of my colleagues, actually, Isabel Zimmerman. And she talked about the importance of tools, why we should care about tools, about using them, and about building them. And that talk really struck with me because that made me even more interested in the tools that we use for data science, but more in general, the tools that we use every day, for example. So some of the questions I had after Isabel's keynote were more general in terms of human history, like what was the first tool that was ever made, who created it, where, when, and how. And I think thinking about those questions can really guide us as we think about tools that we use for programming, for data analysis, and so on. So that's why I find it very interesting to think beyond just the technical aspects of what we do, but also think in terms of like the importance of these things for us as humans. So trying to look for an answer for these questions, I found out that the first tool ever made were stones, essentially. And the first stones that were found were 3.3 million years ago, which it was very shocking to me because us modern humans have only been around for 300,000 years. So it's been essentially a very, very long time ago. And what I found very interesting about this is that shows that us as humans, we are always trying to create and innovate and use tools across time. And but what do these ancient stones have to do with multilingual notebooks? Why I'm bringing this up? So the reason I'm bringing this up is because, again, to reflect how these tools inform what we do and how we use them to achieve certain goals. So I really encourage everyone to check the talk at PyData Boston that's available on YouTube. And without further ado, let's talk about the basic anatomy of a Jupyter Notebook, which is one of the tools that we will be exploring today. So this is from a talk from the history of Jupyter Notebooks that was presented. How many of you here are familiar with Jupyter Notebooks? Yeah, everyone. Cool. So everyone knows how it looks like. And what I find very interesting about Jupyter Notebooks nowadays is the development of more and more extensions around it that are contributed by the community. So everyone knows how to check the docs for the different extensions and so on. And these extensions allow for users to extend the capabilities of Jupyter Notebooks. One extension that I find really exciting, for example, is to translate between different languages, human languages, that's what I'm referring to here. That allows us to translate the markdown cells, what we have written on a notebook, into different languages. So in terms of the current state of the Jupyter extension ecosystem, one website that I found out recently is the Jupyter Extension Marketplace. And that website allows us to explore different types of extensions that are available, as well as it contains some telemetry data about each of the extensions. So we can see how many downloads have been made in the past month, in the past year, for each of the extensions, which extensions are the most popular, and so on. So I find that that website, it's not maintained by Project Jupyter, it's an unofficial website, but I find that really informative when I'm looking for extensions that fit into a particular purpose and so on. So there are some examples of extensions for different purposes. One of them that I really like are IPy widgets, which enable widget interactivity in a notebook, and so on. So in the context of this talk, in which we're talking about multilingual workflows, some extensions can be really helpful when you want to run different languages within a notebook. And those are under that category of runtime and kernel extensions. And the reason why I really like them is because they can enable multilingual execution. So you can have R execution within a notebook, Python, SQL, and so on. And when I was at PyData Boston, I did a live stream with Ian DeBray, who works for MATLAB, and he was essentially showing how he can run a MATLAB engine within a Jupyter notebook. And that's one example of how multilingual kernel extensions can be helpful for data analysis. And by the way, those QR codes that I put along the way are for a playlist with all the videos that I mentioned throughout this talk. So in case you're interested of checking different talks from other conferences later that are related to what I'm talking about, and that can be really helpful. So a lot of what I'm exploring here as the basis for this talk in terms of the history of Jupyter Notebooks came from this previous talk at EuroPython, which I found very interesting because it gives a very solid overview of the history of Jupyter Notebooks. And what I found very exciting about them is that it has had a lot of progress in the past 25 years, I would say, with IPython being created in 2001, and then IPython Notebook first being released 2011, and then the project Jupyter being spun off from IPython in 2014, and then there was the first JupyterCon almost 10 years ago, 9 years ago, and then the stable release of JupyterLab, and by 2018 there were 2.5 million notebooks on GitHub, and a few years ago, about 5 years ago, Nature named Jupyter as one of the 10 projects that transformed science, and it reached almost 10 million notebooks on GitHub. So this very exciting history and the rise of Jupyter notebooks is not without controversies, though, because some people really like notebooks and some people really dislike notebooks. So I don't know if you're familiar with these two talks that were given before. And the first one is I Don't Like Notebooks, which was given at JupyterCon. And and the second one is a PyData talk that was given at one of those PyData conferences called The First Notebook War. And then there were these very interesting blog posts that came up as well with someone talking about contextualizing that first notebook war and someone else responding to the I Don't Like Notebooks talk, talking about how they like notebooks. So there's a lot of controversy around notebooks. And the reason why I love notebooks, beyond or despite of the technical aspects, is because first, the idea of memory and reproducibility in data science, as notebooks can remember the computation state, and you can pick up where you left and continue your reproducible workflow. Second, the idea of collaboration and community. Third, narrative and incremental thinking, how you can develop your analysis step by step, making it easy to share with people through code, visualizations, and explanation along the way. Fourth, the bridge between computational and storytelling, because you can tell your story with the data in a way that can be engaging to your audience. And besides all these reasons that go beyond the technical aspects, as I was reflecting about PyCon US last year, I think there is one more reason that cannot be ignored, which is just the act of playing and the playful nature of exploratory data analysis. And the reason why I say that I was reflecting about this based on PyCon US last year is because there was this very cool keynote talk from Lynn Root, in which she talks about the importance of just playing in general. So in this, nowadays we have this pressure to always be doing things for a particular purpose, and because of work or demands or different goals. I think it's really important as well to think about the idea of data exploration just out of curiosity and out of desire to better understand the world. So that's what I find really exciting about exploratory data analysis with notebooks in particular. So besides being playful, I've come to realize that data scientists are multilingual. Here's some data from the Kaggle survey from 2022, which shows that Python, SQL, and R are the third most used languages among data scientists. And then that's the full data from 2018 to 2022. 2022 was the last year that they conducted that survey. And here we can see that there has been a rise in usage among data scientists of Python, and SQL as well is increasing, and R, although it's decreasing, it seems to be stable. There's a very strong community that remains using R, especially for statistical analysis purposes and so on. So as I see those different trends in Python, SQL, and R adoption, they really make me wonder about what they mean for notebooks. For me, it means that if data science is increasingly polyglot, it means that notebooks and IDEs should be too, as real-world projects and their communities often use multiple languages. So you can have a data scientist who prefers to use SQL, because they are more into data engineering, or a statistician who prefers to use R, and so on. As each of those languages are often used for different purposes. So it's the same idea of tools and how people choose to use the tools that they need and they prefer in order to fit a particular need and purpose. So in terms of multilingual notebook workflows, I want to show an example of how to integrate multiple languages within a notebook. So a classic example would be using SQL to extract data from a database, Python to clean and transform data, and R with a stronger focus on statistics. And there are two approaches of tackling such workflows. One of them is using notebooks. As we know, there is also Quarto, which I've used before, which has a similar idea but different concept, in which you can essentially put chunks of code within your markdown document, and you can execute them as you render the document. So that's also one way of approaching that. So that's a repo that I put some, it's almost like a boilerplate code that I wanted to show with you here with the notebook. So let me run. So let me see if I can change the, so that's a live demo time. So let me see if I can change the, are we able to change to the screen? To change the, yeah. So let's see if it's gonna work. Okay, so if you want, you can just open the repo and run the notebook. So you can just hit run all because everything is made in a way that it should work. Again, one of the big challenges behind notebooks is being able to share a notebook with someone and that other person being able to run it without problems. So yeah, that's definitely something to consider. But the idea behind that workflow of that notebook is that it shows how you can run SQL, R, and Python within the same notebook using like Python and R2Py extensions and so on in order to perform your analysis. So it's just one example, and I think the dependency and the installations that are done in the beginning can be really helpful in case you have data science projects in the future that you want to implement different languages within the same workflow. So that's what I encourage everyone to check it out. And the Quarto document, it follows a different idea in which at the moment that you render the document, it can execute all the chunks of Python and R code that you have. So, yeah. In terms of challenges of those multilingual workflows for notebooks, I think it's worth mentioning that when you add those polyglot capabilities, there are certain complexities that emerge. One of them is that debugging across different languages can become very challenging because you can be dealing with Python, R, SQL, Julia, and so on. Managing dependencies can also have additional challenges because you have multiple languages, multiple dependencies, and so on. And often you are also running, let's say, Python. If you want to run Python in R, for example, you might be using Reticulate, or the other way around with the R2Pi extension, and so on. So those dependencies can also be challenging. Third, we can have some performance overhead as a result of that language switching. And then we have the challenge of the team knowledge and acknowledgement requirements can increase because suddenly the person who is dealing with Python needs to know some R, SQL, and so on. And lastly, it can become harder to refactor the code and to maintain as you have multiple languages being used. And to solve some of these challenges, what I've been personally using is exploring different notebook editors and IDEs that can make that type of workflow easier. And I wanted to show here some examples. And I think everyone should try different tools. I really encourage that because certain tools can be better for certain audiences. Some people have personal preference towards certain IDEs or certain notebook editors and so on. So a few examples of notebook editors that are becoming more popular besides JupyterLab are DeepNote, Go Colab, and Marimo. All of them have their advantages and disadvantages. So that's why I encourage everyone to try different things. And in terms of IDE, everyone knows VS Code. There is also PyCharm, and there is Positron, which is the IDE that I've been building for the past year at work. So just to chat a little bit more about Positron, there is integration for Jupyter Notebook within Positron. So essentially provides a batteries included experience in which people can just download Positron, which by the way, it's free, it's open source, and you can just do your notebook exploration within the IDE. And that exploration is integrated with Data Explorer, which is a tool that's available within the IDE, as well as a native variables pane. And second, in terms of AI integration, there's definitely the integration of Positron Assistant, which enables for AI to make changes to your notebook along the way. I don't know if you can see the, yeah. So essentially you can have sample prompts or you can have a custom prompt as well. And as you click through things, it can make edits live on your notebook. And yeah, and the reason why I bring up those examples, that's just one example of one tool that can be useful. But again, I think the idea of using different tools and trying them out can be really helpful in general. And I like to think again about the philosophy behind the implementation of these tools. And one of the best AI implementations I've seen was actually with Jupyter AI, in which there's this presentation at JupyterCon showing how AI agents within Jupyter Lab can collaborate with each other. So I found that really cool. So I encourage everyone to also check this talk from last year's JupyterCon. And lastly, if you're still unhappy with the current state of notebooks, especially for multilingual data science workflows, I am as well. So either you can check Positron and see if that satisfies your needs, or you can also connect with me. And lastly, I really think about the idea of open source and data science being useful for a better world. So that's why I've been working on these projects. And I hope that you enjoyed listening to my talk. And yeah.